The transport ship docked at Vorath Station at exactly 0600 hours, and the landing bay was already full of noise and movement when the passengers began to walk out through the gate. Tall figures in cadet uniforms moved through the corridor with confidence, their boots hitting the metal floor with heavy, deliberate steps. A group of Krath cadets stood near the far wall, their gray-scaled arms crossed over broad chests, their yellow eyes scanning every new arrival with open judgment. A cluster of Sorvani cadets moved in a tight group, their forearms gesturing quickly to each other as they spoke in rapid, clicking tones. Lumini cadets drifted near the windows, their pale skin catching the blue light of the station, their large eyes calm and distant as always. Then, near the very back of the line, came Mara Calloway. She was 12 years old, 4 feet and 9 inches tall, and she weighed 31 kilograms on a good day after a full meal, had short brown hair tucked behind her ears, a cadet uniform that had been taken in at the shoulders because the standard size was too large, and a pair of dark eyes that moved slowly and carefully over everything around her. She was also pulling a reinforced travel crate on a small wheeled cart. The crate was about the size of a large dog kennel, built from impact-resistant composite material, with ventilation slots along the sides, and a locking mechanism that had clearly been modified from the standard design. Whatever was inside the crate was breathing in short, irritated huffs. The intake officer at the registration desk was a tall Sorvani named Clerk Tavesh, and he had processed hundreds of cadets in his career at Vorath Academy. He had never once paused at a registration until Mara set her documents on the desk, and he scanned the travel manifest. His upper 2 hands froze above the keyboard. He read the entry again. Mellivora capensis. Common name, honey badger. Earth origin fauna. Companion designation. Handler, Cadet Mara Calloway. Human fleet, Earth registry. Tavesh looked at the crate. The crate huffed back at him. This animal, Tavesh said carefully, is not on the approved companion list for Academy enrollment. Mara reached into the front pocket of her jacket and produced a folded document sealed with a gold emblem that Tavesh recognized immediately. It was the personal authorization stamp of Admiral Lena Chen, the commanding officer of the human fleet and Earth's only sitting member on the Interstellar Coalition High Command. Tavesh opened the document, read it once, read it again, and then held it at a slight distance, as if hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something more manageable. They did not. The exemption was valid, properly filed, countersigned by 2 coalition legal officers, and noted that the animal in question was a certified tactical companion under Human Fleet Special Auxiliary Program 7, which apparently was a real program that Tavesh had simply never heard of before this moment. He stamped the document. He did not look happy about it. Mara thanked him politely and wheeled Biscuit's crate toward the dormitory corridor. The dormitory bay for first-year cadets was a long room with rows of bunks on either side, each assigned by species grouping for environmental compatibility reasons. Mara's bunk was at the far end near the wall, slightly separated from the nearest cluster of other beds, which she suspected was not an accident. She had just set the crate down beside her bunk when the laughter started. It came from Gorak first. Gorak was the largest Krath cadet in the first-year intake, which made him one of the largest beings in the entire dormitory bay. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, with a build that suggested he had been carved from something harder than most metals, and he had a voice that carried across a room the way a ship's alarm carried across a deck. He had been watching Mara since the landing bay, and when he saw the small human girl set down her animal crate next to a bunk that barely reached her shoulders, he laughed. It was a deep, rolling sound, and it spread through the room the way fire spreads through dry grass. The Sorvani cadets turned and looked, then clicked among themselves and joined in. Two Krath cadets near the window started laughing so hard, one of them had to grab the bunk frame for support. Even a few cadets from species Mara didn't yet recognize were smiling in the particular way that means I don't know what the joke is, but I know someone is the joke. Mara stood in the middle of all of it. She did not flush red the way some humans do when embarrassed. She did not look at the floor. She looked at Gorok with a steady, even expression. She reached down and unlatched the front of the crate. The laughter did not stop. It got a little louder, actually, as cadets turned to see what was going to come out of the battered travel box. What came out was Biscuit. He was about 60 centimeters long, low to the ground, built like a thick muscle wrapped in coarse black and silver fur, with a flat, wide head, short, powerful legs, and small, dark eyes that held an expression that could only be described as permanent and absolute contempt for everything in his immediate vicinity. He walked out of the crate slowly, as if he had decided to exit at his own pace, regardless of what the universe preferred. He stood on the dormitory floor and looked around the room. He looked at the Sorvani cadets. He looked at the Krath cadets near the window. He looked at Gorok. Gorok was still laughing. Biscuit looked at Gorok the way a very old and very tired king looks at someone who has just made a loud noise in his throne room. Then Biscuit yawned. It was a wide, slow, completely unhurried yawn that showed every single one of his teeth, which were short and dense and looked like they had been designed specifically to break things that were not supposed to be breakable. Then he turned, walked back to the side of Mara's bunk, curled up on the floor beside the crate, and closed his eyes. The laughter in the room began to thin out at the edges, not because anyone had decided to be kind, but because something about the yawn, and the way Biscuit had looked at all of them before delivering it, had introduced a small and uncomfortable uncertainty into the room. Gorok recovered first, and said something in Krath that made his companions laugh again, though with slightly less energy than before. Mara sat down on her bunk, pulled out a small notebook, and began writing. A cadet 2 bunks away leaned over and said, in the common trade tongue that all academy students were required to speak, "What is that thing even supposed to do?" Mara looked up from her notebook. "Whatever needs doing," she said. She went back to writing. The cadet opened his mouth, decided against whatever he was going to say, and turned back to his own bunk. Across the room, Gorok watched the small human girl write in her notebook beside her ridiculous animal, and he decided that she was going to be the easiest cadet in the history of Vorith Academy. He would remember thinking that for a very long time afterward. Training at Vorith Academy began at 0500 hours every morning, and did not stop being difficult until lights out at 2200. The first week was physical assessment, and Mara failed almost every category by the numbers. The strength drills were built around the craft standard, which meant lifting, carrying, and pushing loads that were designed for beings 3 times Mara's body weight. She completed each drill without quitting, but her numbers were at the bottom of every chart. The obstacle course ran through a section of the station that had been deliberately pressurized slightly higher than Earth normal, to simulate physical stress during movement. Mara finished the course last in her intake group, behind even a Sorvani cadet who had sprained one of his lower arms on the 3rd obstacle. The climbing wall was 8 meters tall, with rungs spaced for Krath arm length. Mara could not reach the top rung from the 2nd to last, no matter how many times. She tried. She tried 6 times on the first day, and 4 times on the second, before an instructor told her to move on. The instructors at Voreth were professionals, and professionals did not laugh at cadets during training. They simply recorded the numbers, noted the deficiencies, and moved on to the next assessment with the same flat expression they gave to every result, good or bad. Instructor Vale, a veteran Lumini officer with 20 years of academy service, marked Mara's physical scores in the system without comment. She noted, in the private remarks column that only senior faculty could read, that the human cadet had not complained once, had not asked for modified standards, and had not shown any visible distress during repeated failures. She flagged this as potentially relevant data, and left it there. The other cadets were less professional. Gorok had taken to calling Mara the Kit in Krath, which was the word for the youngest offspring of a small animal, and several of his companions had adopted the term with enthusiasm. They said it in the corridor when she passed. They said it in the meal hall when she sat down. They said it quietly enough that no instructor heard it, and loudly enough that Mara always did. She did not respond to it, not once, which annoyed Gorok more than any reaction would have. Meanwhile, Biscuit was developing his own reputation entirely. The honey badger had, in the first week alone, escaped from Mara's bunk area 3 separate times during the night cycle. The first escape resulted in the disassembly of a maintenance drone that had been parked in the corridor outside the dormitory bay. The drone had been a functioning unit at 2200 hours, and was a neat collection of separated components arranged in a rough circle on the floor by 0400. No one saw it happen. The second escape resulted in the theft of a full ration pack from the Krath Cadet section of the meal storage unit, which required bypassing a magnetic seal that was rated for the grip strength of a standard Krath adult. The Krath cadet whose rations were stolen, a broad-shouldered second year named Dorak, found Biscuit eating calmly in the middle of the corridor, and attempted to take the rations back. Dorak came to breakfast the next morning with 2 fingers wrapped in medical tape, and an expression that suggested he had no interest in discussing what had happened. Biscuit came to breakfast with a small scar across his snout, and the exact same expression he always had, which was no expression at all. The third escape was never fully explained, because no one could determine how Biscuit had gotten into the instructor supply room, what exactly he had been doing there for 2 hours, or why 3 separate equipment cases had been moved to different shelves when everything was returned to its original position before anyone. Official noticed. Only Mara knew all 3 escape routes, because she had watched Biscuit find them and had written each one down in her notebook. Not to report them, to study them. The tactical simulations began in the 3rd week, and this is where things changed. The simulations were run on holographic combat tables in groups of 6 cadets at a time, with each group assigned a scenario and given limited resources to work with. The scenarios were designed by the Academy's Strategic Training Division and were meant to be challenging but solvable through conventional military doctrine. In the first simulation, Mara's group was assigned a defensive scenario. Hold a supply depot against a larger attacking force, with only partial information about the enemy's approach vectors. The group leader was a Sorvani cadet named Preth, who organized a standard perimeter defense based on known doctrine. It was a good plan. 14-minute mark, when the simulated attacking force divided and hit 2 unguarded angles simultaneously. Mara had suggested at the 7-minute mark that the perimeter had 2 soft points, and proposed rerouting 2 defenders to create overlapping coverage. Preth had considered it and decided to stay with the original plan. After the simulation ended and the debrief began, the instructor pointed out the 2 soft points and the exact angles the attacking force had used. Every cadet in the room turned and looked at Mara. She was writing in her notebook. In the second simulation, Mara was given a different role. She was assigned as a secondary tactical advisor with no command authority, but the ability to make recommendations. The scenario was an extraction mission through hostile territory, with 3 objectives that had to be completed in sequence. Mara made 4 recommendations over the course of the simulation. The group followed 2 of them and ignored the other 2. They completed all 3 objectives and finished the scenario faster than any previous group that month. The 2 recommendations they ignored had been the ones that covered the final objective. The group completed the final objective anyway, but lost 2 simulated units doing it. The instructor noted in the debrief that both losses had been preventable. Sail was in that simulation group. She was a first-year Lumini cadet, quiet in the way that Lumini cadets usually were, with the large, calm eyes of her species, and a habit of watching people for a long time before deciding whether to speak to them. She had been watching Mara since the first week without saying anything. After the second simulation debrief, Sail sat down across from Mara in the meal hall. She did not say anything immediately. She picked up her food and ate for a few minutes. Then she said, in clean and careful trade tongue, "You saw the exit vector before the scenario even fully loaded." Mara looked up. The terrain had only one natural choke point, Mara said. Everything else was open, so the exit had to go through the choke point, and the choke point had a blind angle on the left side from the elevated position. Sail was quiet for a moment. "How long did that take you to see?" she asked. "About 4 seconds, Mara said. Sail ate in silence for another minute. Then she said, "Can I sit here tomorrow as well?" "Yes," Mara said. That was the start of it. By the end of the first month, Mara was last in physical rankings, middle in academic scores, and first in tactical simulation performance by a margin that the training division had quietly noted was the largest gap between physical assessment rank and simulation rank in the Academy's recorded history. The gap was large enough that Instructor Vale added another line to her private remarks column. Recommend observation. Methodology unclear. Results not random. Gorak still called her the kit in the corridor. But he had stopped doing it as loudly as before, and he had not done it once in the week since the second simulation debrief. He had been in the group that lost 2 units on the final objective. He knew which recommendations the group had ignored. He had not said anything about it to anyone. But he had started watching Mara in the tactical simulations with a different kind of attention than before. The kind that is less like amusement and more like the careful study of something that has not yet shown what it fully is. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning during the standard briefing block, delivered by Commandant Orath himself, which was unusual enough that every cadet in the hall sat up straighter without being told to. Commandant Orath was a Krath elder who had served 40 years in the Coalition military before taking the academy post, and he had the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet simply by him entering them. He stood at the front of the briefing hall, let the silence settle completely, and then said that the proving trial would take place in 3 weeks. The room shifted, not with fear exactly, but with the particular charged energy of people who have heard about something for a long time and are now hearing that it is real and it is soon. The proving trial was the Academy's oldest tradition, held once a year and open to all enrolled cadets, regardless of year or species. It was a solo survival gauntlet run inside the main combat arena, a massive, open-floored chamber beneath the station's central hub, with tiered observation galleries on all sides. Each cadet entered alone and faced a sequence of automated threats, drone waves, environmental hazards built into the arena floor and walls, and finally a Predator-class combat unit that was the most advanced automated fighting machine the Academy's training division operated. The system was designed to escalate based on the cadet's performance, which meant the better a cadet did, the harder it got, which meant there was no ceiling and no mercy, and no way to simply play it safe and coast through. Every cadet who had ever stood in that arena had been told this beforehand, and had believed it intellectually. Most of them understood it emotionally only after the gate closed behind them. The gallery for the proving trial was always full. Faculty attended in formal dress. Senior officers from various coalition fleets took assigned seats in the command gallery. Diplomatic representatives from every species with cadets enrolled were given reserved positions in the outer tiers. For many alien species, a cadet's performance in the proving trial was a matter of direct cultural significance. Krath clans tracked their members' scores across generations. Servani families used the results in professional appointment decisions, and Lumini communities considered a good performance to be a form of public service to the collective reputation of their people. The pressure, in short, was enormous, and it fell on every cadet equally, regardless of species or size. The bracket was drawn the following week. It was organized by species group first, then by internal lottery within each group, with humans placed in the final slot by default, since there was only one human cadet in the intake, and lone entries were always positioned last. Mara received her bracket position on a slip of paper delivered to her. She read it, folded it, put it in her jacket pocket, and went back to the tactical workbook she had been studying. Sale, sitting on the edge of the bunk across from her, asked if she was going to prepare differently now that the date was set. Mara thought about it for a moment. "I'm going to sleep more," she said. Sale considered this answer for a while, and then decided it was probably not a joke. Training continued. Goruk trained with a ferocity that was almost architectural. He built his preparation the way someone builds a wall, one deliberate block at a time, adding strength and speed and endurance, invisible layers that everyone around him could measure and admire. He was the clear favorite among the craft delegation, whose representatives had already arrived on station and were making no effort to hide their confidence in him. The Sorvani cadet Preth trained with tactical precision, running the same simulated scenarios, repeatedly until his response times were mechanical and exact. The Lumini cadet, Sale, trained in the quiet way her people always did, which looked like meditation from the outside and was actually a form of deep sensory calibration that tuned her psychic interference ability to its sharpest possible edge. Mara trained too. She ran the physical drills every morning, even though her numbers did not move much. She completed the obstacle course every evening, even though she still finished near the bottom. She spent her study hours on the arena schematics, which were publicly available to all cadets in the Academy library system, and she read them with the focused patience of someone who is not looking for the obvious information, but for the information hidden inside the obvious information. She also spent time with Biscuit. This was not unusual since she spent time with Biscuit every day, but in the weeks before the trial the nature of that time changed. In ways that only someone watching very carefully would notice. She gave him commands in a quiet voice, just a word or two at a time, and he moved in response to them with a precision that should not have been possible from an animal that appeared to spend most of his time either sleeping or looking for things to break. She ran him through patterns, left, right, forward, hold, flank, using hand signals combined with voice, and he followed them with the flat efficiency of a machine that had decided cooperation was occasionally acceptable. Instructor Vale walked past the exercise area one afternoon and stopped at the edge for 3 full minutes, watching this. She did not say anything. She went back to her office and added a third line to her private remarks. She wrote, "The animal is trained to tactical hand signals. Suggest reviewing Special Auxiliary Program 7 documentation before the trial. This may not be what it looks like from there." Outside, the day of the proving trial arrived. The gallery filled 3 hours before the first cadet was scheduled to enter the arena, which had never happened before in Commandant Orath's tenure, and he noted it in his own records without comment. The craft delegation occupied the upper tier on the east side, their representatives in formal clan colors, already loud with anticipation. The Sorvani observers were arranged in neat rows in the northwest section, their 4 hands folded in the precise resting position their culture used for formal public events. The Lumini delegation sat in the lower tier near the arena floor, close enough that the ambient light from the combat systems would catch their pale skin and make them glow faintly at the edges. Coalition officers filled the command gallery in dress uniforms. Commandant Orath stood at the central podium and gave a brief address about tradition and excellence and the meaning of service. The gallery was politely attentive, And then the first cadet walked through the gate, and the gallery stopped being polite and became alive. The first 6 cadets performed well. A Sorvani cadet from the second-year intake ran 14 minutes and received a long, respectful applause from his delegation. A craft second year hit 16 minutes through sheer physical dominance and was rewarded with a thunderous roar from the upper east tier that shook the observation windows. 3 more cadets came and went, each earning their time, each walking out of the arena with the slightly stunned expression of someone who has just discovered that being told something is hard and actually experiencing it are 2 entirely different things. Then Gorak entered the arena. The Krath delegation stood up. Gorak fought like something that had been born specifically for this room, and he lasted 17 minutes and 22 seconds. Powered him down, he walked out of the arena, under his own strength, to a reception that was the loudest thing Mara had ever heard inside a pressurized structure. Sail went after the midpoint break. She lasted 16 minutes and 11 seconds, and earned a long, warm acknowledgement from every delegation in the gallery, because even cadets from species with no love for the Lumini understood that what she had done with the drone targeting arrays was not supposed to be possible, and was beautiful in the cold, precise way that impossible things sometimes are. And then the announcer said Mara Calloway's name. The gallery did not go quiet. It went through several stages in about 4 seconds. Confusion at the name, recognition that this was the human child, visual confirmation as Mara walked through the far gate into the arena floor, and then laughter. It was not mean laughter exactly, or at least not all of it was. Some of it was just the laughter of people who have been watching intense and impressive things for hours, and have suddenly been given something that looks, by every available measurement, like it does not belong in the same room as what came before it. A Krath dignitary in the upper gallery leaned toward his aide and said something in Krath. His aide wrote it down. It translated roughly as, "Did the child wander in from the youth instruction wing?" Mara walked to the center of the arena floor. She was carrying nothing. The announcer confirmed this with a slightly uncertain pause in his commentary. No weapon, no shield unit, no equipment of any kind. And then the gate behind her opened a second time. Biscuit walked in. The gallery laughed harder than it had laughed all day. Somewhere in the command gallery, Admiral Lena Chen, watching through a live feed from the human fleet's command deck, 17 light hours away, leaned back in her chair and smiled at no one in particular. The gate closed. The trial began. The first drone wave deployed from the ceiling ports at the 40-second mark, which was standard for all trials, regardless of cadet profile. 6 drones, mid-class, flight-capable, with stun charge emitters and basic threat tracking software. They came in fast, and they spread into a standard encirclement pattern that was designed to herd the cadet toward the center of the arena, where the floor emitters could add pressure from below. Against a Krath cadet, the drones worked as containment, forcing the fight into close quarters. Against a Sorvani cadet, the drones were a targeting problem to be solved through positioning. Against a human child standing in the middle of the floor with a honey badger, the drones recalculated threat level and began descending for what their programming apparently assessed as a straightforward engagement. Mara was already talking before they reached the halfway point of their descent. Not to anyone in the gallery. Biscuit. Her voice was low and flat, and she used single words and short phrases with hand signals that she had been teaching him for weeks. And Biscuit was already moving before the drones completed their approach pattern. He did not move like a pet. He moved like a weapon that had been aimed by someone who had already calculated the geometry of the room. The first drone came in from the left, and Biscuit hit it from below, at an angle the tracking software had not anticipated, because the tracking software had been calibrated for bipedal threats at standing height, and Biscuit was never at standing height. The drone spun, corrected, and tried to reacquire. Biscuit was already gone, moving to the right side, where the second drone had closed to within range. He hit it in the emitter housing, which was the most fragile external component on that class of drone, and the drone dropped 2 meters before its stabilizers caught it. In the gallery, laughter had already started to thin. It was being replaced by something that did not yet have a clear name, but felt like the first moment of uncertainty, the first small crack in the assumption that this was going to be over quickly. Mara, meanwhile, was not fighting anything. She was moving along the arena wall, her eyes tracking not the drones, but the arena itself, the wall panels, the floor grating, the junction points where the environmental systems connected to the structural frame. The Academy made the arena schematics available to all cadets in the library system. Most cadets use them to study drone approach vectors and combat unit movement patterns. Mara had spent 3 weeks studying the maintenance infrastructure. At the 2-minute mark, she found the coolant cycling junction she had identified in the schematics. A pressurized line behind a wall panel in the northeast corner that vented thermally regulated gas at regular intervals to keep the arena floor temperature stable during extended engagements. She pulled the panel cover off with both hands, located the manual override valve, and turned it. A wide bloom of cold vapor rolled across the northeast quadrant of the arena floor. 3 drones that had been converging on Biscuit's position lost optical tracking in the vapor cloud and pulled up into a hover pattern while their sensors recalibrated. Biscuit had already left that quadrant. He came out of the vapor from the south side and took down 2 drones in 4 seconds flat. The gallery was quiet now. Not completely, but the laughter was gone and had been replaced by the attentive silence of people who are watching something they did not expect and are not yet sure how to categorize it. At the 4-minute mark, all 6 drones were down. Not destroyed, Biscuit was not large enough to destroy them outright, but disabled, their emitters damaged, their stabilizers compromised, 3 of them lying on the arena floor, and 3 hovering at reduced capacity and holding patterns that indicated they had been coded to withdraw from engagement when below operational threshold. The second wave deployed immediately. 12 drones, heavy class, with physical impact capability, in addition to stun charge. The gallery made a sound, a low collective exhale that expressed something between surprise and concern without committing to either. Mara looked at the new drones for approximately 2 seconds. Then she looked at Biscuit. Biscuit looked at the new drones. His expression did not change, because his expression never changed. He moved. What happened over the next 8 minutes was difficult to follow from the gallery, because Mara and Biscuit never stayed in the same part of the arena for more than 30 seconds, and the action moved too fast for comfortable observation from the upper tiers. Analysts in the command gallery had access to the arena's internal tracking system, and they watched the data with the focused attention of people who are professionally trained not to show emotion, and were failing at it. Mara had located a second infrastructure point, a bank of floor emitters in the south quadrant that were designed to generate pressure fields during the trial, but could be partially shorted by introducing a conductive path between 2 specific access panels. She created the conductive path using a length of wire from the first disabled drone. 4 floor emitters in the south quadrant went offline. The heavy drones, whose approach pattern depended on coordinated floor pressure to limit cadet movement, lost a quarter of their containment geometry. Biscuit used the gap. He used it repeatedly, the same gap, because the drone's programming adapted to close it, and he moved before it closed and then used the next gap that opened in the process of the first one closing, and this continued for the full 8 minutes in a way that the combat analysts would later describe in their report as exploiting recursive adaptation lag in multi-unit autonomous systems, which was a technical way of saying that Biscuit kept finding the door that the drones kept almost closing. At the 12-minute mark, 9 of the 12 heavy drones were down. The gallery was completely silent. Not the silence of boredom. The silence of a room full of beings who have stopped doing anything except watching. Goruk was leaning forward in his seat, with his large hands flat on the railing, his yellow eyes moving between Mara and Biscuit, with an expression that had left amusement a long time ago, and was now somewhere in the territory of focused and reluctant recognition. Sail was sitting with her hands in her lap, her large eyes calm, but the faint luminescence that Lumini cadets emit when their nervous system is highly engaged had increased, until she was visibly glowing at the edges of her hands and face. The Krath dignitary who had made the joke about the youth instruction wing was no longer leaning toward his aide. He was sitting straight up, both hands on his knees, watching the arena floor with the expression of someone who was in the process of revising a conclusion they had considered final. At the 12-minute mark, the Predator-class combat unit deployed. It was early. The system had escalated because the performance threshold for standard wave deployment had been exceeded, and the trial's adaptive programming had determined that the next phase should begin ahead of schedule. The Predator unit was 4 meters tall and built from the same composite materials as the station's exterior hull plating. It moved on 4 articulated legs, with a central body housing 6 weapon systems and an advanced threat tracking array that could maintain simultaneous locks on multiple targets in a changing environment. It was designed, according to the Academy's documentation, to test the limits of a fully trained and experienced Krath warrior. It entered the arena from the north gate, and its tracking array immediately identified 2 targets: 1 human child, threat level minimal, and 1 small quadruped animal, threat level classified as negligible. Its programming had no category for what either of those targets was about to do. Mara looked at the combat unit. She did not move for 4 seconds, which felt like a long time in the arena. Then, she said one word to Biscuit. He looked at the combat unit. The combat unit looked at him. Biscuit made a sound that was not a growl and not a bark, but something lower and older, the sound of an animal whose ancestors had been making that sound for millions of years before anyone in the galaxy had invented weapons or academies or combat units. And then he moved. What followed lasted 25 minutes. It was not a clean fight. It was not a graceful fight. Biscuit took 3 direct impacts from the unit's lower weapons in the first 4 minutes. Impacts that would have ended the participation of any cadet of any species in the gallery. And each time he absorbed the hit, rolled with it, recovered in less than 2 seconds, and kept moving. His fur was built for this, in a way that the combat unit's designers had not accounted for. Because they had not designed the unit around an animal that had been evolving for roughly 12 million years, in an environment where getting hit was not a reason to stop. Mara was working. She was moving around the perimeter of the combat unit's engagement radius, staying outside its primary weapon arc, using the remaining disabled drones as cover and as reference points, and she was studying the unit. Every time it moved, she watched how it moved. Every time it fired, she noted the pattern. Firing sequence. At the 22nd minute, she found what she had been looking for. A thermal exhaust cycling port on the unit's left flank, used to vent heat from the central power system during sustained engagement. Positioned at a height of approximately 62 centimeters from the floor. It was not visible in the combat unit's standard documentation. It was in the maintenance schematics, the ones in the Academy library that most cadets had not read all the way through. Mara gave Biscuit a signal, 2 words and a hand gesture pointing left low. Biscuit heard it. He shifted his pattern. He began hitting the same point on the left flank, repeatedly, precisely, at the cycling port housing, and the combat unit began trying to protect that point, and in protecting it, the unit had to modify its movement pattern, and in modifying its movement pattern, it opened its primary weapon arc in a direction that had previously been covered. Mara stepped into the open arc. The unit's tracking system identified her, locked, and began firing sequence. Biscuit hit the cycling port housing at full force at the same moment. The combat unit's power system registered an internal fault. Its firing sequence interrupted mid-cycle. It tried to reset. Biscuit hit the port again, and again, and again. The combat unit powered down at 37 minutes and 14 seconds. It was not graceful. The unit did not fall dramatically. It simply stopped, its legs locking into their standing brace position, its weapon systems going dark, its tracking array shutting off with a low descending tone that echoed off the arena walls, and then faded into nothing. And the arena was silent. Not the silence of before, when the gallery had been shocked into quiet attention. A different kind of silence. The kind that comes after something has happened. Everyone in the room knows they will be describing to other people for the rest of their lives. And no one wants to be the first one to speak, because speaking would mean it was over. And no one is ready for it to be over yet. Mara walked to Biscuit. She knelt down on the arena floor and ran her hands over him carefully, checking every point where the impacts had landed, pressing gently to check for depth, running her fingers through his coarse fur, the way someone does when they are making sure that what they care about most is still whole. Biscuit sat still for this examination with the patience of an animal that has been through worse and knows it. Then he licked her face once, slowly, and looked back at the gallery with the same expression he had worn on the very first night in the dormitory. The expression that was not an expression at all. The expression that said he had never, for a single moment, considered any other outcome. Clapping. Her hands were small, and the sound they made in the large arena was not loud, but it was clear. And it was the only sound in the room, and that made it carry in a way that a louder sound in a noisy room never could. Then the Lumini delegation joined her. Then the Sorvani observers, starting from the front row and moving back like a wave. Then the coalition officers in the command gallery, a few at first, and then all of them, and several of them were standing. Then, from the upper east tier, the Krath dignitary, who had made the joke about the youth instruction wing, brought his great hands together once, and then again, and then steadily. And the sound those hands made was like two pieces of hull plating being struck together. And the Krath delegation around him rose from their seats. The gallery became very loud. Mara stood up from where she had been kneeling beside Biscuit, looked at the gallery for a moment with the same steady expression she had worn on the first night in the dormitory, and then walked to the exit gate, which opened ahead of her as the trial system registered the official end of her run. Biscuit walked beside her, slightly ahead, as if he were leading. The gate closed behind them. In the corridor outside the arena floor, a medical technician was waiting, with a scanning unit to assess cadet condition after the trial, as was standard procedure. The technician scanned Mara, found some elevated stress indicators and minor bruising from arena debris, and cleared her. Then the technician looked at Biscuit. Biscuit looked at the scanning unit. The technician decided the scan could be optional and marked the form as completed. Inside the arena, the gallery was still making noise when Commandant Orath walked to the central podium and waited. It took longer than usual for the room to quiet, which was not something that happened to Commandant Orath often, without showing it. When the room was finally still, he looked at the trial results on the display panel beside the podium. He read the time. He read it again. He said in a voice that carried to every seat in the gallery, 37 minutes and 14 seconds. He paused for a moment to let the number settle. The previous record was 19 minutes and 40 seconds, set 11 years ago by Cadet First Class Urath of the Krath 3rd Fleet Academy, currently serving as a commander in the Coalition Outer Defense Wing. He did not say anything else about the record. He did not need to. The gallery understood the distance between 1940 and 3714 without being told, and the understanding moved through the room in a visible wave of shifting postures and exchanged looks, and in the Krath delegation, a slow, sustained sound that was their cultural expression for something that had exceeded expectation so completely. That ordinary approval was not sufficient. After the formal proceedings ended, 3 senior officers from the command gallery convened in a side room adjacent to the main corridor. They were not disciplinary officers. They were intelligence and strategy officers, and the conversation they had was about the trial footage, specifically about whether it should be submitted to the Coalition's public record network before a more thorough review could be conducted. The argument for withholding it, presented by the most senior of the 3 officers, was that the footage demonstrated tactical capabilities and training methodology that could be considered sensitive information if distributed without context. The argument against withholding it, presented by the second officer, was that withholding publicly recorded Academy trial footage required a formal classification order from High Command, and that initiating such an order for a cadet performance would require an explanation that none of them wanted to write. The third officer said nothing during this conversation. He was looking at his communication panel. He had received a message 40 seconds ago from Admiral Lena Chen of the Human Fleet, sent from her command deck, time-stamped during the exact moment the combat unit had powered down. The message contained 4 words: "Do not touch it." The footage was submitted to the public record network at 2100 hours that evening, unedited and in full. By 0600 the following morning, it had been viewed by more beings than had watched any single Academy trial in the institution's history. By 0900, it had been referenced in 17 separate Coalition military analysis channels. By noon, the Krath Third Fleet had formally requested a copy for inclusion in their tactical training curriculum, which was an action that had no precedent in the recorded relationship between the Krath military and the Coalition. Academy system. The morning after the trial, Mara was in the meal hall at her usual time. She had her notebook open, a bowl of food in front of her, and Biscuit was on the floor beside her bench, with a ration pack he had acquired through means that the kitchen staff had apparently decided not to investigate. Goruk came in at 5:30. He moved through the meal hall toward the Krath section as usual, but he stopped when he reached the point where his path came close to Mara's table. He stood there for a moment. He was quiet in the way that large, proud beings are quiet when they are choosing words with unusual care. Then he spoke in Krath. It was a short phrase, 5 words, delivered in a low and steady voice. Mara did not know Krath. She looked at him with an open expression that said she had heard him and was waiting. Goruk translated it himself, which was something Krath warriors almost never did, because the translation was always considered insufficient, but he did it anyway. "There is a Krath phrase," he said, in trade tongue, "for a warrior who wins in a way that no one expected, and that no one can fully explain, but that everyone agrees was real." He paused. "It does not translate well into any other language." Another pause. "You have earned it." He walked to the Krath table. He did not look back. Mara watched him go, then looked down at her notebook. She wrote something in it, closed it, and went back to her food. Sale arrived 4 minutes later, sat down across from Mara, and ate in silence for a moment before asking the question she had been building toward since the previous night. "I want to understand something," she said. "Ask," Mara said. "Every other cadet prepared for what the trial expected from them," Sale said. "You prepared for what the trial actually was." "Yes," Mara said. "How did you know the difference?" Sale asked. Mara thought about this for a longer moment than she usually took. "Every system has a gap between what it thinks it is and what it actually is," she said. "The manual says what a system thinks it is. The maintenance documentation says what it actually is, Most people read the manual and stop there. Sail was quiet. "And the badger," she said. "How did you train him to do that?" Mara looked at Biscuit, who was sitting on the floor beside the bench, systematically dismantling the ration pack in the unhurried way he did everything. "I didn't train him to fight," Mara said. "He already knew how to do that. He's been doing it longer than we have. I just trained him to listen to me while he did it." "And to trust you," Sail said. "And to trust me," Mara agreed. Sail was quiet for a long time. "That is a very human way of thinking," she said finally. Mara picked up her bowl. "We've had a lot of time to practice." Far away, in a conference room on the Coalition Intelligence Division's main station, 4 analysts were finalizing a report that had been requested the night before by the Deputy Director of Strategic Assessment. The report was about Earth's enrollment in the Coalition Academy system. The original assumption behind Earth's acceptance had been diplomatic, a gesture to bring humanity into closer alignment with Coalition institutions, a way of showing good faith to a species that was still relatively new to the broader galactic community and still being evaluated for full membership. The report's conclusion, after reviewing the trial footage, the training records, the tactical simulation data, and the background documentation on Special Auxiliary Program 7, was that this assumption required revision. The relevant section of the report read, in the dry and careful language of intelligence documentation, "Earth's enrollment does not appear to be a diplomatic gesture from their end. The preparation, the program structure, and the execution suggest a deliberate demonstration. Recommend updating all prior assessments of human strategic intent and capability profile accordingly." The Deputy Director read the report twice. She authorized its distribution to the full Strategic Assessment Division. She then sent a personal note to the analyst who had written the section on Biscuit's training methodology, asking for a full, separate report on Special Auxiliary Program 7, and specifically on whether there were other animals in the program. The answer, which arrived 3 hours later, was yes. There were 47 other animals in the program. The note attached to the list said that the program had been running for 6 years, that it was administered jointly by the human fleet and a small research division at a university in a place called New Zealand, and that the honey badger was actually not the most advanced animal in the program. It was the most deployable. The Deputy Director sat with that information for a while. Then she wrote a formal request to Admiral Lena Chen for a full program briefing at the Admiral's earliest convenience. Admiral Chen's response came back in under 2 hours. It was 3 words. "We'll set something up." Back on Vorath Station, in the dormitory bay, Biscuit had found a new way out through a ventilation access panel behind Mara's bunk that had not existed as an access point before he had apparently decided it should be one. Nobody found out until the following morning. By then, he had been 3 corridors away and back twice. He had left no evidence of what he had done in those corridors.